Good day to you. My name is Colin Andrews. I'm the chair of Tiyeni, a UK registered charity with an action arm registered in Malawi with an all Malawi staff. I'm absolutely delighted to be invited to speak to you about what is happening in Malawi and some of the amazing effects that have been achieved by a good soil conservation. The reason I'm here is because I watched the farming conference, the Oxford Farming Conference with Elaine Ingham, Dr. Elaine Ingham, who presented, and when I heard what she was talking about, it aligned perfectly with what we were doing on the ground in Malawi and had been for some years, but it explained some of the successes. I got in touch with her pretty much immediately after seeing that, and very kindly she came back to me very quickly, and we have organised with her team for 10 scholarships to be offered to our 10 staff in Malawian staff, in grounding in soil science. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here because this is a fine summit which exactly accords with the interests that we have, and I hope that you'll be interested in what I've got to say. Tiyeni, just in case you know, means let's go in Malawi, and let's get on with it, let's get going. What we do is train farmers. We pass skills and knowledge to farmers, and we have 3 really important fundamental principles in order to do our job properly. And this is set in stone from an early stage of the Tiyeni organisation. Number 1, we only ever train farmers that request it. We never go in and proselytise like quite a lot of other organisations do. They'll go in and say, hey, I got the best things in sliced bread. We don't. If they want to come to us, they'll come to us. We go back and say, well, it needs to be the whole community. If the community comes back to us, we say, we'll train you, providing you set up a proper arrangement and land in your area. And then we go and look for funding the training process. So we only respond to requests. Secondly, all trustees of Tiyeni work entirely for free. And not only do we work for free, but we don't claim any expenses. If we have to fly out to Malawi and do some work out there with the Malawi team, then we pay for our own costs out of our own pockets. It's a pretty important fundamental principle of Tiyeni, which is a small organisation, that pretty much all the money that comes in gets spent in country teaching farmers. We have 1 part-time staff in UK, no offices, no overheads to speak of apart from running a website and employing a part-time member of staff. So it all goes out there. And the third principle is we are not an aid organisation, an aid charity. Now, aid charities do fantastic things for humanitarian aid and just wonderful. But people who come to rely on aid, and farmers who want to be farming, they don't want to be standing in food queues for 2, 4, 6, 8 hours or days, not repeatedly. Of course, in a humanitarian crisis, that may be the only possibility, but our aim for Tiyeni is for our skills and knowledge that we pass on to the farmers to make it that they're entirely in charge of their own destiny. The self-esteem that builds in the farmers is palpable. You can go into where Tiyeni's deep bed method has been adopted by farmers, and 1 or 2 years in, they feel so confident, and their confidence had before been shaken for all sorts of reasons I'm going to explain to you. So, let me just, before I get into the nuts and bolts of it, explain to you the sort of successes that Tiyeni farmers have. Tiyeni teaches the deep bed method, which I'll explain later. Typically, in the first year of adoption, their yields go up by 2.5 times, about exactly 146% on the survey we did last year, but 2.5 times what it was before. Over 5 years, it's more than 12 times more profitable if you look at profit in terms of labour materials and inputs, adding all those up together, and then the returns, 12.5 times or more than 12 times more profitable than traditional methods. Thirdly, the average maize yield in Malawi is around about 2 tons to the hectare, depending on which year it is and which area of Malawi and so on. This year in Chiteka, we achieved 8 tons to the hectare on average, and one farmer got just under the 10 tons of dried maize weight to the hectare. And the big one in our big livelihood survey is on average, deep bed farmers under the adopted method that Tiyeni espouses eat 1 extra meal a day. 1 extra meal is huge. When you think that, I guess most of the people listening to this will be getting 3 meals a day, and maybe 3.5 meals. That's very unusual in Malawi. You're talking about 2 or maybe 1 meal. When I was last out there, I was working with some Malawians, quite poor Malawian farmers. Their breakfast was a sweet potato boiled in water and eaten in their hand. Quite often a meal would be that, or a maize husk roasted over a fire and then just eaten. So 1 extra meal a day, that is big. So that's the successes of the deep bed method that I'll be talking about. And I'll be talking about it in 3 sections. Firstly, the background of farming in Malawi, to give you a snapshot picture of where we are now. That could be applied to many other countries in sub-Saharan Africa. There are many similarities. Malawi just happens to be one of the poorest, 4th or 5th poorest country in the world. And then I'll talk about the major challenges for Malawi, particular challenges, and then I'm going to give you details of one single answer that mitigates all those challenges to some extent or other. So the next slide shows you a picture of Africa, and you can see that Malawi is sort of down in the southeast corner. And in fact, that's a very important southeast corner because it's the southern end of the Great Rift Valley. One of the greatest rift valleys in the world runs through Africa at this point, and it's very marked, it's very noticeable because it's 1,000 to 2,000 feet deep. It's got big lakes in it all the way up, right the way through Tanzania and Kenya, but right at the southern end is Malawi. And then the picture beside it you'll see is Malawi is a long, thin country with a long, thin lake on its eastern boundary with Tanzania and Mozambique. And all those names there that you can see are where Tiyeni is active in training farmers. Some of them are research stations, which I'll talk to you about later, where we're doing research with the Malawi government, who are very interested in how we're achieving these huge yields for apparently lower inputs. So the next slide is the FAO data on maize yields. It's actually our world in data. The maize yields in Malawi and adjacent countries. And you can see they're up and down all over the place. But up and down between what? Well, between 0.5 ton per hectare of dried maize to 3 tons maximum. And that one was only for Malawi. And I think that one was where, we're going to talk about it a bit later again, where they provided free or subsidised chemical fertilisers to deal with the famine that happened just before then. So those countries, Zambia, Tanzania, Mozambique and Zimbabwe, are right surrounding Malawi. They're all very relevant to this discussion because I have been to all those countries and they all have similar problems. Malawi's is just a bit more marked. We'll talk about that a bit later as well. So what are the Malawian challenges? Well, there they are up on the board on slide number 7. And you can see the first one is falling soil fertility and soil compaction and surface runoff and erosion and loss of topsoil and flooding and siltation and climate change. And all of those seem to have a sort of common, apart from the climate change, which I'll again come into later, all of those deal with Africa and man's two great resources apart from himself, the soil and water. And those two have been massively ignored, the care of those two, in most countries in the world, but even worse in Malawi. And you might ask yourself, why in Malawi? Where did this come from? Why are we treating the soil so badly there? And I have to say that Western UK, British and other countries from Europe coming in and teaching their farming methods to Malawian soils has not been a good story. It has been very destructive. So talking on the first of those, the falling soil fertility, you'll see the picture that's come up now showing you a really sad picture. You can see the furrows there, sort of across the contour line. You can see that they've been washed away and there's silt lining through, but also look at those furrows. There's nothing, those ridges, there's nothing growing on them, not much. Why? Why is there nothing growing? The soil fertility has plummeted, and that's due to a lot of reasons, but one of the main reasons is that they're just trying to take too much out of the soil without putting the right stuff back. Instead of putting the right stuff back, which we'll talk about later, they have been on a mission to feed the soil, in inverted commas, with chemical fertilizers. And those chemical fertilizers have not only helped to destroy the structure of the soil and what's going on inside the soil, but they've also done terrible things to the acidity of that soil. They've taken the acidity in some areas, we've measured under 4. Under 4, it's very acidic, that, and does have a damage on growth. Clearly, crops are very resilient, as you will have heard from Dr. Elaine Ingham. They're very resilient. You can have a chemical level of acidity in one part of a root at 4 or 5, and another part of the root 7 or 8, and they will cope with that. But when you've got a blanket area covered consistently with a chemical fertilizer, NPK or urea, these two fertilizers, it really upsets the balance of acidity on the soil. So that's one of the main reasons. That soil is overworked and then treated with the wrong stuff, artificial chemicals. The next big challenge for Malawi is compaction, and the next slide you'll see is 2 fields where that compaction has been broken up. Imagine planting plants in that cloddy, compacted soil. This has been gone over with a pickaxe. Before that, the hard pan would be so hard that water can't go through it, roots can't go through it. So the traditional method of farming is that you have a ridge like that, and another ridge there, and another ridge there. And at the end of the year, when you've cropped your harvest, you split the ridge down the middle, push that half over that way to join the other half of the next ridge, and then that's your soil ready for planting your plants in. So what's happening to the soil that's not being moved around? At 1 hoe depth, that hoe is hitting the soil over and over again every year, creating this hard, compact layer that the water can't go through, roots can't go through. And those roots, if they can't go through, they go down, hit the hard pan, spread out, and then that's fine until there's a dry spell. The next great challenge for Malawians is surface water runoff. This, I'm sad to say, is the norm in Malawi. Wherever I've gone around in Malawi, I have found when it rains, the water runs off the fields again and again. And the trouble is, When that water from the sky goes down, it lands on the ridges and maybe sinks in because that soil's been fluffed up a bit. It goes through that fluffy bit and it gets to that hard pan layer. That becomes a slip layer, and as you will see from the next picture on the slide, you will see that whole fields of topsoil run down the hill and disappear into the rivers. It's the most terrible sight, and I've seen it again and again. All that work the farmers put in, all that energy, and then the plants starting to grow, and then a big rain washed away. And then you can see in the next picture, the flooding and siltation, 2 pictures of 2 rivers taken from the air, one in the north of Malawi and one in the south of Malawi, and look at that topsoil being washed down into the lake. So you get this erosion, this water racing down, taking its soil with it, and it does so many damaging things. It gets down to the fertile valley floors and spreads silt over it, completely cloaking the crops, killing the crops. So that's siltation. It runs on down into the lake and disappears into the lake to the bottom. It might feed the fish, but it doesn't feed the soil anymore, so you've lost it from the top where you need it, where the crops are. And then also that silt gets washed down the rivers to the hydroelectric power station, which is one of the principal sources of power for Malawi, and it blocks it up, and you get a power cut on the whole country. So this surface water runoff is just desperate in Malawi. And I want to tell you some horrible figures. The FAO, that's the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, did a study in 1999, and that study came up with soil loss per hectare per annum of 29 tonnes. And they did it again in 2014, 15 years later, and in the north of Malawi, guess what? It's worse. It's 39 tonnes of topsoil in North Malawi every year. That's unsustainable. And clearly, any farming system that doesn't cope with that isn't going to work. Simple as that. And lastly, the last big challenge is the effect of climate change on farming communities. The big challenge for them is that the rains are less predictable. And it's not even that whether they come or don't come. The problem is that you plant your seeds on the first rain, and then you have a growth period, and historically they had rains for about 3 months. They went on, not constantly, but a wet season. Now, increasingly, they get 2 to 3 weeks with no rain in the most important time of the growing season, 2 to 3 weeks into the growing season. So next you're going to hear a video of Isaac Javula, our Chief Executive Officer in Malawi, talking about the effect of climate change on farmers in Malawi.
I am Isaac Javula, the Chief Executive Officer of Tiyeni Malawi. In Malawi, the agriculture sector is facing a number of challenges. Some of these challenges have been because of climate change impacts. For instance, we experience a lot of erratic rainfall patterns these days compared to the previous years. And there is a lot of flooding and also drought. We also experience a lot of erosion, which is so costly to the nation. Now, deep bed farming is a practice which configures the slope of cultivated fields by making sure that we till the soils and create marker ridges. And along these marker ridges, we create furrows and planting beds. These are permanent structures. Once done, then many years will follow without any disturbance to the soils. Now, on these soils, we apply manure. We also practice mulching and organic ground cover. We plant cover crops. The application of manure improves the fertility of the soils.
Okay, so how did Tiyeni come into being, and how did deep bed farming, how was that created? In 1999, the FAO sent Francis Jackson, a soil scientist who worked for the FAO in India, Brazil, Malawi, and various other places, to go into Malawi and look at a suspected hoe pan. Hoe pan is hard pan. As I explained before, if you've got a hoe, you've got a blunt edge at the front, and it goes down into the soil, and anything your side of the hoe is lifted to soften the soil. But for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, and that compression over the years made this compaction layer. And this is what Francis Jackson found there. And he said that he told me recently, he said, it was almost as if because it was under the ground, it didn't exist. But it did exist. So in 2002, there was a terrible famine, and Francis Jackson happened to be out there meeting John Crossley, founder of Tiyeni. And John Crossley said, how are we going to stop this terrible famine? People are going around chewing leather or eating banana leaves, doing anything to get just a bit of food. And people were dying, of course. Families breaking up. This is the time when The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, quite a famous film, was made, that terrible famine. And Francis Jackson turned around and he said, look, I've drawn a picture. This is what we need to do. And that picture is on the screen now. So on the left of that screen is the hard pan Francis Jackson discovered in pretty much all areas of Malawi. He's scraped off about 150 millimeters, 15 centimeters, and he's come to a hard pan which is rock hard. So the picture on the right is the actual picture. We've got the original that he drew up for John Crossley, showing how to break that compacted layer and allow water through into the subsoil. And John Crossley took that plan, that section through the soil, and over the next 8 years he adjusted it, altered it, using the principles of it, with slightly different now, but the principle is there. You'll notice that there it's showing the percolation going through the furrows, but what it doesn't make clear is that the land, the soil underneath the beds in deep bed farming is actually decompacted. And in fact, we don't use furrows and ridges. We use deep beds, which we'll hear about more. So we have a short video now of comparison of two different sorts of farm. If you'd like to see that, and you will see the difference planted by the same farmer in adjacent fields.
We are at the field of Mr. Mark Konga. He has actually told us that this soil is very rocky. As we can see, it's very rocky, and for him to manage to have this good field, he had to break the hard pan. This soil hard pan, he has to break it, and using pickaxe. Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. So after breaking the hard pan, he constructed these beds, and he planted with manure. That's why we are seeing this good maize stand. Otherwise, he planted almost together with his fellow, for this field. But as you can see, this field still has the hard pan down there, and that's why the maize stand is so, small like this. But the difference was just 2 days.
2 days.
After planting, and this one planted in 2 days. So you can see the difference is actually because of the hard pan that is there. Where he had to break the hard pan, apply manure, and I doubt if this has manure, and also the fact that he's taking care of this field. He's expecting a lot more than last year. He said that last year his harvest was not as expected this year. It was quite small, but this year he expects about 30 bags, 50 kg bags from this field. So it's quite a huge difference. So you can see the impact of deep bed farming. It is impacting positively on farmers' productivity.
So going on with the formation of deep bed farming, by 2012, Huddersfield University came out and said this needs to be upscaled. And I became involved in 2013. I became a trustee. I had seen it there. I'd met John Crossley by just by chance, he'd taken me round a deep bed farm, and being a surveyor, I took one look and I thought, this makes real sense. It conserves the soil, it conserves water, and it reduces the problems of farming, of evaporation. It reduces the surface area of the beds, and it's less work. Why, John, is this not all over Malawi? And he said, well, how would you do that? And I said, well, I'll try and show you. And so I got involved as a trustee, and we've got some extra trustees, and we've worked really, really hard to have a clear business plan for how we can roll this out throughout Malawi. In 2017, we made national news, papers, radio and television. The High Commissioner for UK to Malawi visited Tiyeni farms, and the next video you'll hear is her talking about what she saw in her first visit to a farming area where Tiyeni is practiced. Tiyeni deep bed method is practiced as well as traditional methods.
It is impossible not to recognise the benefits. There's on one side where the deep bed farming method has been applied, huge maize crops, rich and thick, and on the other side essentially no crop. So I know that they had problems with drought here this season, and that has not really affected, as far as I can tell with my untrained eye, the crop that has been grown through the deep bed farming method. So it's really fantastic to see what an impact this method can have, and I really think it could be transformational for the way that Malawi farms its crops. I'm excited to go back to the office to talk about it with the experts in my team who really know about agriculture and to see how we can support it.
The system encompasses a number of agricultural techniques that conserve soil and water and sustainably enriching soil with nutrients.
The deep bed method is a combination of various approved technologies which ministry is already applying.
Tiyeni Executive Director Isaac Chavula said the technology was developed to cushion effects of climate change, which haven't spared Malawians.
It was a system that was designed based on the problems that we have in Malawi. For instance, in 1999, FAO conducted a study. They found that countrywide there is a hard pan. And the same FAO indicated that in their research in 2014, 29 metric tons of soil get lost per hectare per year. So out of that, we need to come up with a system of farming that can control erosion completely. No soil loss, and that's what exactly happens on a deep bed.
So starting in 2013 with about 38 farmers in 4 villages, as of now we're pretty much 20,000 farmers. We were 17,600 farmers by June 2020. That's gone up because we've had another session of training. And deep bed method is here to stay. Malawi government stated in its second year of research on our methodology that it outperforms all other methods of farming tested. Now they have quite a long procedure for testing new technologies, but the point about deep bed farming is nothing is new, absolutely nothing. I won't be giving you any surprises in terms of how we're getting these amazing yields. The methodology won't surprise you at all. You might be surprised at the number of elements that have been brought together, but I even have my doubts for that. This is what we call common sense. And indeed, that's what the farmers, during the training quite early on, after the first 2 or 3 hours, you hear them talking and saying, this makes sense. This is common sense. And I have to laugh there because my old headmaster, when I was 13, he turned to me and he said, Andrews, because they didn't use Christian names in those days, Andrews, there's nothing so rare as common sense. And there we have it. So farmers, they really get it. And these 20,000 farmers, we haven't gone out and said, let's find 20,000 farmers, we'll teach them. These farmers have come to us. We've seen the method, we want to learn. Tell us how to do it. So, deep bed farming, these are the steps you have to do. You'll see on slide 17, hard pan, we've talked about, marker ridges, deep beds, furrows, raised footpaths. That's the topographical arrangement we need to go to. So the first picture, 2 pictures, breaking a hard pan and looking at the hard pan after you've broken it. I mean, that is hard work. Now, we've tried to break the hard pan with hose. We've tried to get farmers to do that. It doesn't work. That long blade at the front of a hoe is not sharp enough to break through the compacted layer. Not only that, but with the pointed end of a pickaxe, not only do they break up the hard pan, but just below, because we only get them to go down 30 centimetres, 300 millimetres, we think that's enough. But where that point of that pickaxe is hitting stars any compaction below that, and that compaction won't actually be as bad as the layer that we find from about 25 to 30 centimetres down. So that's their job, to get down so that we've got 30 centimetres of broken soil. They then have to break those clods even smaller. So that is big work, but it's absolutely essential. And although we are firm believers of conservation agriculture and firm believers of no-till and firm believers of organic farming, we cannot ask our farmers to do all that unless we break the hard pan compaction first. And when we tried to go and present to a conservation agriculture summit in South Africa, they said, no, sorry, you can't come because you're not conservation agriculture because you dig the beds in the first year. Odd, isn't it? Because I haven't said that, I haven't seen that anywhere. All the conservation agriculture reading I've done is compaction is an enemy. Of course, you can break it down with planting the right sort of agroforestry and waiting 3 to 5 years while the roots do it. Yeah, absolutely, I'll go for that. But no Malawi farmer's got 3 to 5 years to wait. They've got to get their crops in today. They've got to feed their families. So breaking a hard pan, key. Then the next thing is the marker ridge. Now, I am a surveyor, so surveying is very much I've spent 50 years doing that, and this was the area where I saw the biggest complication because it's technical. Anyone, probably by eye, could create a contour ridge on a simple slope, but most of the slopes in Malawi are not. They're complex. They've got various gullies and dips and bulges over them. So originally we started using tripod with a plumb bob and moving that around, but that's cumbersome. So we now use line levels, and that has 2 effects. One is we can do it much quicker. I say we, the farmers, and we can train them quicker. And secondly, it's collaborative. So you bring your whole village together because you need quite a few people to set that line up with stakes all the way down, making sure it's exactly in the right place. And then a whole lot of people to dig that marker ridge as quickly as you can so it's set in stone. And let me tell you, if you get it wrong, if you've got 100 metres, one end you've got no water, and the other end, if it's 1% out, you've got a metre of water standing. Well, it won't, it'll run down the hill. So it's absolutely critical that we get exactly on the contour line. We do this every 30 metres or so down the slope, depending on the incline. Those marker ridges are then planted with vetiver grass, and we'll come to that in a moment. We've got some pictures of that. But once the ridge is formed, you end up with a structure ready to build the beds. So forming the deep beds, there's a diagram up on slide 20 now, and you will see the form of our deep bed farms. On the far right hand side is the marker ridge. That's got vetiver grass growing in it. Vetiver grass, you might know, has a very deep root. It doesn't seed badly. It propagates asexually and is a very, very good erosion controller if that marker ridge ever overflows, which it hasn't so far. And then you've got a ditch uphill of it, and then you've got a furrow before the first bed, and then the beds you'll see are on decompacted land, and they're 1 metre wide, and they go down into furrows. And you'll also see that one of the furrows shows the closed either furrow ends or the baffles to stop water moving sideways. So this is a isometric plan of a deep bed, giving some of the measurements that we try to work to make sure that those beds are never walked on by the farmers again. The beds follow the line of the marker ridges, and they're exactly 1 metre wide, not more, for a very, very good reason. If they're bigger, people will step on them and recompact the soil. And the idea is these beds are never stepped on again. And then down the furrows between the marker beds, we put baffles every 3 to 5 metres to stop water moving laterally. And the result of that is you end up with deep beds, furrows in between, and the next picture shows what happens when it rains. The water lands on the beds and soaks in. The water, if it doesn't soak in, it runs into the furrows and sits there and soaks in, percolates into exactly where you want it, in the subsoil. So those are two pictures. You can see pretty stormy skies. You can see two very happy farmers, and there are a lot more like that who see this happen when it rains. Now, it rains hard sometimes in Malawi, and in 2017, January, I think mid-January, I heard that there had been 4 inches of rain in northern Malawi in as many hours. And I was worried, and I made contact the next day with, or 2 days later, with our team in Malawi, and I was told that the field officers had gone out to all their fields and not one farm had spilled their water. And that gave me great confidence that not only does this work with normal rains, but it can deal with exceptional conditions. And so this marker ridge, which has a 1/2 metre ditch behind it, and these furrows in between the beds and the decompaction all add to that one great job done, conserving water. Don't let it run down the hill. Hold it where it lands. Let it go into the subsoil. This brings me to the conclusion of my first talk, and I hope you will look forward to the next talk, where I talk about the management and some of the results in detail from a deep bed farm. But in the meantime, thank you for listening, and thank you for any support you can give to Tiyeni. May I assure you that every penny that we receive will go out to Malawi to train farmers in the deep bed method.